If you are a regular of our virtual services here at UU Wellesley Hills, you no doubt have noticed this lovely article that stands behind me every week at my home pulpit. In fact, even if you're a first-time visitor, you might be wondering, what the heck is that thing back there? Well, this is a staff, commonly called a staff or a walking stick, or possibly even a wizard's staff, which I suppose is technically what this is. You see, I purchased it at the Sterling Renaissance Festival in Sterling, New York, around the year 2000. Now, the Sterling Festival is one of many such events which happen all over the United States and Canada, and in fact, all over the world. But that was not always the case. The very first one was held in a school teacher's backyard in Laurel Canyon, California in the late 60s. It was called the Renaissance Pleasure Fair, and it was supposed to be a class activity as well as a fundraiser for the local listener-sponsored radio station KPFK. However, it drew some 8,000 people, which I would say made it a surprising success. Most Renaissance fairs are set up to symbolize some fictional hamlet in England that might have existed during the reign of Elizabeth I, which is commonly thought of the blossoming of the English Renaissance. A Ren Fair, as those of us who have made this a part of our lives tend to call them, will generally consist of temporary, semi-permanent, or permanent, a little town, complete with one or more stages for plays to occur, plus roving actors that interact with the attendees at seemingly random times. And there's also singers, dancers, jugglers, musicians, comedians, and magicians, as well as some of the most wonderful independent vendors of handicrafts, clothing, books, and art. And all of these people are dressed in Renaissance garb, speak in some attempt at Elizabethan English, and all of the products must be period correct. That is, you might find the most perfect case for your smartphone, but it won't be advertised as such. And it will be made of leather, not plastic. Oh, I haven't even gotten to the food yet, which is all designed to enhance the Renaissance experience. And the beverages often include beer, wine, ale, mead, Turkish coffee, or herbal tea, anything that they might have had at that period. There is really no end to the culinary delights that one of these things has to offer. Visitors are encouraged to come in costume, which is where I come in. I was one of those folks who would show up year after year, nearly every weekend, in my Ren Fair clothes. I hesitate to call that a costume because, you know, I have casual clothes, work clothes, and Ren Fair clothes. They're just another way for me to express and represent myself within a certain context. No different really from what I'm wearing now, which I call my preaching clothes. While many, many people attend these functions in whatever clothes they would wear for a pleasant day of entertainment, perhaps as if they were attending an amusement park, these folks we would call the mundanes. While I, even though I never actually was employed by the fair, I was one of those who would come to be known as fair folk. I was part of the family. Now, these Ren Fairs can happen anytime during the year, but the very first one that I attended, and the one that I attended for the longest duration, was in fact the original Renaissance Pleasure Fair in Southern California, which has now grown to an average attendance of 250,000 people per year and is open every weekend during the months of April and May. It is essentially one big, huge Beltane festival. Now, in case you're not aware of what Beltane is the historic celebration of the fullness of spring. The word Beltane is of old Gaelic origin. It has historically been celebrated throughout the British Isles and in fact throughout Europe. And it almost died out, but then the neo-pagans brought it back to life again as a way to celebrate the rebirth of Earth at spring, the fertility of the world, creativity, freedom, and joy. The Southern California Ren Fair has a giant maypole in the center. And in fact, they ceremonially decorate it once per day. They dance the maypole. Beltane represents the time of year after the planting, when the new sprouts are just coming up, when the trees are in bloom and the pollen fills the air, when all the flowering plants bloom, when the lambs and calves are still new. It is a very exciting time. It also represents a time in a person's life when they have reached full adulthood with all its rights and privileges, but not yet all the responsibilities that tend to weigh a person down over time. And this connects easily with the English Renaissance theme. After a particularly difficult period in English history, which included the Black Death, the 100 Years' War, constant financial insecurities, and a king whose failing health led him to paranoia and suspicion, which resulted not only in several of his wives being executed, but also tens of thousands of others. The reign of Queen Elizabeth came to be a time of relative stability. And this allowed England to join the rest of Europe in the Renaissance that inspired national pride through the classical ideals, international expansion, technological advances, and a love of the arts. This is the period that the Ren Fairs all celebrate. But there's another aspect of both this time in history and this time of year. And while at the fair, one is constantly surrounded by all this joyful music and laughter and bright colors, but then there's this little parade that periodically goes through the park. And I don't know what it's actually called, but I like to call them the Dancing Dead. It's a parade of people wearing black rags and bones, banging a little drum, dancing joyously. But it's a kind of memento mori to remind us that even though everything is growing and new, it is precisely then when everything is vulnerable. A sudden frost can come and kill all the new buds and ruin the crops and prevent an abundant harvest, and thus condemn an entire community to famine. It is precisely at these times of the most joyous new beginnings that we are in the most danger. Now, for me, the Ren Fair represented more than just a day of outing and fun and entertainment. It was, for me, an opportunity to join with others in our hopes and dreams of creating a kind of Renaissance in our own time. Having grown up during the Cold War and the rise of counterculture and the various civil rights movements, we were then, at that time, facing also the rise of conservatism in America. And this was causing an increasing level of anxiety among those of us who were not exactly in with the conservative in crowd. The Ren Fair gave us an opportunity to create a kind of sanctuary for those who lived in less than traditional family structures or intimate relationships, or who maybe did not fully appreciate the allure of gun ownership, but who did think that cannabis should be legal. When we went to the fair, we would dress in our all-natural clothes, leave our internal combustion engine in the parking lot, carry our stoneware drinking vessels, because heaven forbid we would ever be seen carrying styrofoam, and enjoy a world with no electronic music or amplification or electric lights, basically a pre-industrial age world where we would buy goods made with human hands instead of in factories, and small businesses rather than large corporations, and revel in the joy of just human creativity. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is not really an accurate recreation of the Renaissance. I know that. This is more about us trying to manifest our fantasy into reality than anything else. But it changed us. It gave us hope. It allowed us to envision a new world that was more hospitable than the one we were living in, and empowered us with the knowledge that we could create it, if only on a temporary basis. This time in our history, this incredibly unique time, makes me think that we are primed for a new 21st century Renaissance. After a particularly long and difficult period in American history, which included the COVID-19 virus, the war on terror, financial insecurities, a leader who was not obviously in failing health, but nonetheless exhibited a rather high level of paranoia and suspicion, which resulted in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, and possibly contributed to the deaths of tens of thousands through the mismanagement of the pandemic. I am hopeful that this new administration will lead to a relative stability that will allow us to lead with the rest of the world a kind of modern Renaissance that will inspire cultural pride, humanitarian ideals, international cooperation, technological advances, and a renewed love of the arts. This is the hope that I have for the future, always remembering that it is in these early stages when any endeavor is at its most vulnerable. So here is my Beltane blessing to you. It's adapted from the Carmina Gadelica. Bless, O threefold, true and bountiful, myself, my spouse, my children. Bless everything within my dwelling and in my possession. Bless the kine and crops, the flocks and corn, from Samhain Eve to Beltane Eve, with goodly progress and gentle blessing. From sea to sea and every river mouth, from wave to wave and base of waterfall. Protect me in truth and honor. Satisfy my soul and shield my loved ones. Bless everything and everyone, all my land and my surroundings. Great gods who create and bring life to all, I ask for your blessing on this day of fire.